In the past two episodes of the meta history, I talked a lot about the game being in a very unbalanced state. In the 1.0s, we had stuff like Triple Tri-Slosher, Old Brella, and Stingray. And in the 2.0s, we had stuff like Pre-Patch Bubble Blower, Double of Plenty of Weapons, and, well, Stingray again. They really took their time fixing that special, didn't they? But today, we're going to be talking about the 3.0s. This is Splatoon's golden age, with almost nothing being broken, a relatively good balance with a wide variety of weapons and weapon classes in the meta, and a really fun time. Let's go over what exactly makes this so great. If you enjoy this episode of the meta history, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the future parts. And with that all being said, let's get started. First up is patch 3.0, which will have a lot of important buffs, such as making Squeezer's paint mode actually paint, helping with a bunch of fixes for dynamos and brushes, increasing Brella paint, making weapons paint their feet better overall, giving Bamboo 85 damage, increasing the range for Gluga Dualies, and making Tenebrella paint better and its shield regen faster, which will be a huge thing for making it meta. On top of that, we got some sub-weapon adjustments, making Beacon significantly better, Ink Mine being able to sub-strafe, which is a huge buff for that sub-weapon, Hurling Bomb being reworked, Sprinkler being able to take much more damage, and even Stingray got some damage reduction and prevented you from using it inside your spawn shield. We even got to see some solid gear buffs. This patch just had it all. Real quick, we can also talk about 3.1.0 purely because it didn't have that big an impact on the meta. It had some nice buffs for Tetra Dualies and Undercover Brella, and reduced Blaster's explosion radius, which is a pretty fair nerf. This wouldn't kick Blaster out of the meta, as it would still really benefit from what the 3.0 meta was, and overall made things a lot more fair. We also got to see end parries become 190, to reduce a bit of the inkjet spam happening, but we'll get to that a bit later. That was really it for 3.1. It was a very short patch. And finally, we're going to be talking about the 3.2.0 patch notes right at the start as well, and this is because it was an overall great patch. Some of the buffs here were really great at giving some weapons their own sense of identity. This is where Junior got its larger ink tank, and Splash-O-Matic got its lack of jump RNG. Luna Blaster got a similar buff to have a lack of RNG, and L3's got their increased necessary movement speed. H3 got that cool sound effect for when you hit a 3-shot, and was able to finally ink a wall properly. Rollers were no longer ink hungry when rolling at full speed. Swiffer got to charge full speed in the air. Hydra Splatling got its damage back, and finally Undercover got its shield regen for an assist. And they also increased the damage to the Rainmaker shield from E-Leaders by 15%, but nobody cares about that part. So many of these buffs gave weapons a sense of identity and made them super unique compared to others in their class, which was overall really impactful. This patch is arguably the best in Splatoon 2's history off of that alone. The nerfs were also pretty fair. Rapid Blaster got the same nerf as the regular Blaster, making its shot size a little bit smaller. Ballpoint charged really fast when out of ink or in the air, so they toned that down. And Dually Squelchers had a massive paint output because of their standard fire mode, so they reduced that by 20%. All good changes. If that wasn't good enough, Autobomb used 55% of the ink tank instead of 70, meaning it was actually a usable sub-weapon, and this is the patch that actually fixed 10 missiles, allowing you to use them to mark onto a single target with 10, or 2 targets with 5, and overall changing quite a bit to help the special be better. Additionally, they did nerf Inkjet slightly, but more by making it fair, giving you an actual gauge when the Inkjet marker lands. Before this, an Inkjet user landing would have no indication of when exactly it was going to touch the ground. Points for special buffs would be a bit standard, but would pretty much reduce special output altogether, especially on the custom Dually Squelchers, end parry Dualies, regular Dualies, Ballpoint, Mini, regular Slosher, Rapid Blaster, and I guess they did it for the Clash Blaster and Custom Blaster. Wasn't really needed, but doesn't really hurt it super much either. Overall, an amazing patch, making the current meta even better in this version than in previous. Still with me? Alright, so now let's talk about what exactly is good in this meta. Now, the top 3 weapons currently are the End Parry Splat Dualies, Splat Brella, and Custom Blaster. And these weapons effectively form a triangle with each other. Basically, Blaster counters Brella, Brella counters Dualies, and Dualies counter Blaster. This is a really great thing to have for your top tiers, because it means everything in the meta is going to have an effective counter. The best weapons aren't something that no one else can fight. 52. It's something that you want to run the meta to counter the meta. And it also leaves plenty of room in weapon comps to run things that aren't as conventional. There's a lot of other things that are great in this meta right now, so I'm going to talk about a bunch of the other options that saw plenty of use these days. The regular Roller and Carbon were in pretty good spots since they could fight stuff in the meta and didn't have to deal with armor as much, where Dynamo was also pretty solid for its special output for whichever one you needed, being armor or Stingray, and the Flow Flingser Roller would start to see some use once missiles got buffed in patch 3.2. Nozzle noses also finally got to see some use. L3 was great for outputting inkjets and ballers and had solid fighting capabilities, where H3D was great for armor support. Definitely a bit challenging, but since it was 190p, you could output a lot more than you could today. And finally, there was Foil Squeezer, which now that it's had its painting mode buffed, was about the same as the weapon it is today. So while it took a lot of time for people to master it, it would still be a really strong pick for those choosing to invest into it. Bucket fans had a good bit of everything. Try was useful on its short-range maps, Machine Neo was still pretty solid if you mained the weapon, Bucket had both the regular kit and Deco seeing use, since Bucket Deco actually had a special at this time because Baller was not utter trash. Explo and Blob were both new, with Bloblobber having a lot better damage at the time, giving it some great uses in Rainmaker or against stuff like Brellas or Baller users. And on top of that, we even got to see some X-Splosher. X-Splosher at the time had broken ink efficiency in paint, but people were a bit new and getting used to it. It was amazing in zones and could even work in the other modes with how great the main weapon was. So there was plenty of things if you liked buckets. As for Splatlings, we got to see a lot of the ballpoint. While it didn't have its Nouveau kit, it was still a really strong main weapon, so even something like Toxic Mist and Inkjet on a backline ended up working out pretty well for it. It was a pretty unique weapon, and its ability to be a jack-of-all-trades by having a close-range fighting mode was something we never really saw from the Splatling class. It was a great option, and as time would go on, we would enter a ballpoint meta much later in the 4.0s, but that's getting a bit ahead of ourselves. What about Chargers? Now, Chargers were in a fine spot in terms of they could counter most of the current trio of weapons, because they were slower ones with Dualies and lag, Blasters lag, and Brella being able to have its shield broken. But the main thing Charger struggled with were the obscene amount of inkjets in the meta. Now, Charger of course could deal with inkjet by shooting it out of the sky, but there were just so many inkjet dives and they were so frequent with the amount of double or even sometimes triple jet comps. That being said, it's still Charger versus inkjet. It's not really that bad, especially without as much armors. And we did get to see a good bit of the Reg Charger and Firefin with their better paint. The normal E-Leader was still pretty solid in zones. Squiffer with its new charging fast in the air capability was solid, and even Bamboo would see some use from some really dedicated players, showing it didn't need main power to see some form of success. YouTuber was the only one we didn't really see whatsoever. Admittedly, shooters right now kind of struggled. Shooters are a lot faster nowadays because in the 4.0s they would start to get some end and starting lag buffs. However, the main shooters we did see would be Neosplash after its jump RNG buff, a little bit of T-Tech, but honestly N-Parry kind of hard outclassed it, and mainly Custom Jet Squelcher because Ray was broken. Yay! Oh, and of course a little bit of Junior and NZAP for the armor support category, but again, nothing staple. H3D eventually became the superior option for the armor support options if you did want to run armor at the time. Finally, there was a bit of Inkbrush Nouveau, so pretty much every class had some viable option at this time, which as you can see is pretty amazing. This meta was really diverse and was a big first for Splatoon's history. Splatoon 1 had nowhere near this level of weapon diversity, and early Splatoon 2 was way too unbalanced to have this. Comps that we have nowadays don't hold a candle to the amount of variety in weapon classes that were used these days. And while the meta may be more aggressive than it is passive, I think people overall had a lot more fun with it. This to me is when Splatoon was at its peak. The balance patches were great, there wasn't too much over nerfing or main power or power creep, and it wasn't in the same early chaotic broken state that it was at the start. A lot of the things that needed to be toned down had been toned down, and while I wish Ray was toned down like it was in 4.0 earlier in the 3.2 era, I think it's ultimately not a huge damper on the meta. And this brings us to 4.0.0, released September 13th, 2018. Now this patch wouldn't end the 3.0's meta, it would continue for a little bit, but this patch did start the trend of continuing to nerf things even though the state of the game was pretty well balanced. The only extreme thing right now is Ray, and despite that, we would continue to get nerfs in future that were just way too overboard. Now this patch really only had the dualies in this case, with the ink consumption being increased from 6 to 9%. The changes to Blob and Slosher were plenty fair, but it was the start of nerfs that would really start to become more extreme and more undeserving as time went on, rather than buffing other weapons to increase their strength. In this patch alone, we only saw 52, 96, Luna, a little bit of Ink Mine, and Rapid Blaster getting 10 less points for special. That's it. Everything else points for special-wise was a nerf, the specials were only nerfed, and while the stage reworks were nice, overall things were going to get a good bit weaker in terms of main weapons, unless if you played a shooter. Now, I admittedly look on this era with a bit of nostalgia. I mean, this is when Prophecy started, the team I would be on for almost 3 years, and I have a ton of memories from this time. But looking back, I really forgot just how diverse comps were. This is one of the main strengths Splatoon has. You can fight a comp that has a bucket and umbrella and a blaster, in addition to something like a bathtub, all in one comp. What other game can you see stuff like this? And seeing the current Splatoon meta be reduced to more just shooters and shooters and shooters just really sucks. I really hope Splatoon 3 looks more like this in terms of its variety. Now, 4.0s are going to introduce a lot of problems. There will be some positive changes, but there's going to be some power creep and a lot of things to deal with. But that'll have to be for another video. This, to me, will forever be the golden age of Splatoon 2, and I will always look on it very fondly. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a great day.